Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Subscription Radio with your host, Joel Van Horn and DJ Fish. How's it going, DJ?
It's going great. We're recording at a different time of the day than we normally do.
Yeah, time of day, and for me, in a different place. I'm visiting family, so I'm in a different office, and it's evening. No sun, all artificial lighting, but hopefully it's decent. I don't know. We'll see.
You still look beautiful.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I like your hat, by the way,
both
too.
Wearing
you switched
hats.
It up.
Yeah. Today I went in and I talked to Rebecca and I was like, you know what? Today I'm feeling kind of fancy. I'm gonna wear my Costa Rican hat. So
it's a festive evening. Everything's different today.
Yeah.
Switching it up.
All right, man. So let's get into it. First off, I do want to thank Gil, who gave a shout out to our last episode around Shopify Unite.
Yes,
so,
thank you for that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate the
Great
love.
Promo. So what are we talking about today?
So what you and I were talking about a bit was, so I in particular have been having a lot of conversations with brands over the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. And one of the recurring themes and one of the things that's come up a lot around Shopify is just the frustration where you rely on having a dozen different apps to run your business, mm-hmm. and that these apps need to be deeply integrated. And so like one thing that people talk about, especially even like with Recharge, is that Recharge is like if someone's running a subscription program, it really is important that whatever other apps they're using are deeply integrated mm-hmm. into the subscription engine, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I think the part of what I was interested in talking about is as engineers and just as experts in the field,
having been here in the e-commerce world for a while.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's interesting where I think you go from a place of, I think having a dozen apps makes sense when you're just starting off because you can find specific products that achieve specific parts of a mm-hmm. workflow. Mm-hmm. But when you get to a certain point of scale, you're brushing up against wanting to accomplish more complex flows where it's not just a matter of integrating apps, you're really trying to coordinate between apps. I think a perfect example would be if you're doing SMS as well as email marketing, which, I mean, even like the most basic brands do that. But if you're not using the same product to do your SMS as you are your email, then it becomes a bit of a nightmare, especially when you're at scale, of sending emails that are not somehow coordinated with when you're sending text messages. Right? So let's say Klaviyo for email, Attentive, PostScript, whatever for SMS. Mm-hmm. So there's a bunch of different directions we can go in around just talking about like, what are the apps? At what point does it make sense to invest in going from like 6 different apps into one app? Mm-hmm. I believe that's like the unbundling to an extent. And then also, but like for you have built the subscription commerce platforms from scratch, so to speak.
Right.
And so you come from the other world, which is you integrated the APIs for multiple services yourself. And mm-hmm. so I'm curious, like, what did you brush up against with that? And typically, what were those services that you integrated? And did you brush up against similar problems? Like, did you have 12 apps or 12 integrations to accomplish your flows? Do you feel like you were able to go pretty deep? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I tend to think back to how I got to where I am, and in this case, through the lens of the app ecosystem that exists in Shopify or other platforms, right? Where at the time, 5 years ago, when I or maybe 6 years ago now, even more, when I kind of got into the whole subscription space, was that, D2C brands in particular were all kind of figuring out their secret sauce of how to best, market to potential customers or, retain existing customers, things like that. And there wasn't really much technology out there, right? As D2C brands or marketers who worked with them kind of figured out some really good tactical solutions, I think more and more apps would pop up to make it easier to try those things out on Shopify, right? Like CartHook is a good example, not specific to subscription, but you came up with a way originally, right, to capture emails in the cart and then send an email reminding them, hey, you've got this thing in your cart. Do you still want it? Here's a discount, whatever it is. That's a very specific tactical solution that then became commoditized. And then you guys moved into another direction, which is also a great opportunity for marketers. And so the way I kind of observed that was brands that were new were just trying to figure out, like, who's their customer? How do we best position our product? How do we target them? What messaging do we use? And as the app ecosystem in Shopify, for instance, became more rich, they could try different things out, right? And you're kind of just trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. Since then, fast forward, there's clearly some best practices, and people use now very specific app. I call it, or a lot of us call it stack, right? Marketing stack or whatever. But now we're at a point where it's so templatized that it doesn't make sense to have these individual apps that can't really talk to each other. And in my experience, I kind of sidestepped a lot of that by going custom much, much earlier. And, you can coordinate the type of interactions between the different services you're using, like Klaviyo or analytics platforms, data platforms, email systems, whatever it is that you're using. But you still have some of the limits in those third-party platforms, like Klaviyo, right? Klaviyo has actually become kind of the go-to for everyone at this point, it seems like, right? You can send custom events in there. You can trigger custom flows. Like, that can be very, very highly controlled. With Shopify, you only have very specific events that go into Klaviyo. With a custom system, you can have all sorts of events for very, very granular purposes, right? Like reminder emails or reminder emails for specific segments, passing in exactly the data you need or content you need to, fill those email templates, things like that. That's very, very specific, right? Then you have, limits of like, well, Klaviyo is not really good with the amount of data you can send in or the type of data you can send in. And, like a really frustrating thing about Klaviyo specifically is customers will have more than one subscription, right? But a customer profile doesn't have a concept of having multiple of anything in it. It's just this flat profile of first name, last name, email. You can put like aggregated information in there, but you can't really keep, let's say, subscription data in there. So those are the kinds of things that become trade-offs, but at least you have more control over the flows, but not so much over the data. Other systems, again, it's being able to have a little more specific control, but you end up sidestepping a lot of the apps by just combining that functionality through custom code to make it easier to do some things. Like, what are some of the apps that you would say you've heard are frustrating to use together, let's say, right? Because that can give me some ideas of how I've solved some of those problems myself. I'm sure there's a ton of examples. Or are there none off the top of your head?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll have to think for a second. Nothing jumps out. I think I'm going to actually jump to the opposite argument, which is if you've ever integrated Google Analytics on an e-commerce store and the amount of debugging, and same with even, quite frankly, Facebook pixels, the amount of debugging and just dealing, especially around e-commerce data, like, it's why I don't have hair for a number of reasons. It's one of the top 10 reasons, and it's also why I'm gray.
You've dealt with analytics data for years, just wrangling.
It's like part of the value, and like with Shopify, it's you put in your Google Analytics ID and it sends it to GA. Now, to what extent does that give you the granularity of information that you want in GA? I would say it's like probably like 80% of what you want. The rest of it you would accomplish through custom, API calls, I think, but for the most part, it works. It's normalized, and like that in and of itself is valuable because it's just one of the various ways that you can screw things up, and it's a bit of a time sink. It's a time sink. I think so to answer your question around like apps that don't play friendly, one thing I'll say is that a big part of this is a function of the fact that Bold and Recharge had to exist outside of Shopify. We had the same issue with Kartuk because Shopify themselves didn't have a way to directly integrate those apps, and so any app that you wanted to in Recharge's situation, any app that you wanted to have, we'll call it deeply integrated or even integrated at all with your subscription program, it had to be like that company or that app had to have gone out of the way to integrate with Recharge.
Right.
And not every app's done that. Like it's a relatively small app store within Recharge. So just by virtue of that, you're limited by the number of solutions now. So if you're doing like affiliates, you're probably using Reversion. I'm trying to think of any examples of apps that don't. A lot of the things that break down are around like weird use cases, and not weird in that like they're not.
They might be common,
crazy,
but not common enough that these apps really like accommodate them properly. Is that what you're
part of
thinking?
the issues is that everyone's like kind of blind. Like at one level, you have Shopify, which is, I always think it's like building a house on someone else's land.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
everyone's building. It's almost like building. How about this? It's like building an apartment building where everyone, or maybe it's condos, where everyone owns their own condo within the. I guess that would be a co-op. Okay, so fine, it's a co-op, and everyone is building on this other person's land. Everyone's building their own. They're responsible for building out their own co-op apartment. No one really has full visibility into what anyone else is doing, unless, of course, you like explicitly go out of your way to do a deep integration. I think part of what Shopify's done now, which at least in theory should simplify a lot of stuff, is in using Shopify as the like central hub for deep integrations.
That's clearly the path they're going down, right? Opening up as a
Which
platform.
makes sense.
Totally.
Now, I think that. Oh,
I was just going to say, you're talking about deeper integrations. I was actually curious, does Shopify have policies where you can't have apps talk to each other? Or are there certain situations where you can?
I think they're starting to go down that path now.
Yeah.
I feel like I read something around.
I feel like it came up
But
recently.
up until
I
this
can't
point,
place it.
up until this point, no, not that I know of. I think for all intents and purposes, it just makes a lot of sense to go through Shopify. I'll give you a perfect example though. Gorgeous, which does customer support. One of the most important features of Gorgeous is being able to deal with order information and subscriptions, and that's only possible through a direct integration with Recharge, because Recharge did not have a way to natively integrate with Shopify, and so the only way that within Gorgeous could manage refunds and subscriptions and stuff would be through a direct integration.
Yeah, that
My
makes sense.
assumption is that with the native Shopify APIs, is that now Gorgeous can integrate with Shopify, and regardless of which subscription app you're using, Gorgeous doesn't need to like do anything necessarily unique to enabling refunds or changing the subscriptions. Now, you and I both know there's still a fair amount of complexity around selling plans and whatever, but I think that would be like a great example where Gorgeous can integrate directly with Shopify. It presumably accomplishes like 85% of the integrations with any potential other subscription product, subscription app.
Yeah, I mean, like, because at that point, the payment is managed by Shopify just like any other order, whereas with Recharge right now, it's completely on the Recharge side. So they have to basically look at Recharge and Shopify as two different e-commerce systems that you're integrating with from a gorgeous perspective. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to probably be a great thing for certain merchants. But it also sounds like you'd have to then, at least from a Recharge perspective, migrate over, which is a whole other story, right? So what are the deeper integrations that you wish were out there or would happen sooner than later or are necessary for an effective, I mean, it's typically marketing stack, right? E-commerce plus SMS plus email plus what else?
Retargeting, landing pages. I mean, I think a lot of those things, a lot of it has been accomplished pretty well. I think Shogun is a really good solution for building landing pages, for example. Now, if you're driving someone to a Shogun landing page, I do believe that it just naturally inherits your Google Analytics and Facebook pixel information. I can't say for certain. I don't know off the top of my head. But in general, I think that's like the biggest disconnect right now, at least around subscription, is that there's different events within a subscription life cycle that warrant different communication.
Yep.
And truthfully, to accomplish a lot of that stuff would require you to build a custom app that integrates directly with Klaviyo and sends events or whatever based off of an information and properties based off of when you want those events to go through. I think, and actually maybe the perfect example is quizzes, which is like one of the early use cases that you brought up to me, which is for a lot of products, there is an onboarding personalization quiz, whether it's for skincare or hair or whatever. A brand, and a lot of these are headless implementations, like where they have a custom quiz where they basically spit out, hey, here's our prescription, so to speak, of the perfect product for you. Even if they have like 3 SKUs, they probably have 3 SKUs, and like so there's like a 33% chance you're gonna get one of them. But they ask you like 25 questions, and they will give you the SKU,
specially formulated for you.
Formulated for you. And so that's a great example of even just where, like, how do you do a deep integration with that? Right? Because
Typeform's typical, right? Like, I don't know what other ones they'd use. I did actually come across.
I haven't seen that many Typeforms. I think that it's obvious when it's a Typeform. Yeah, like
I've seen a lot of them.
I haven't seen that many Typeforms. I've seen
there was like an app or a SaaS solution that was specific for creating these forms too. I forget what it was called. I wonder if it took off, but I hear you. That's a really interesting entry point, right? That a lot of these brands are taking, and then you got to figure out how to get that to actually tie into the e-commerce side, right? To then choose the product and then add it to your cart or what have you.
Yeah, and so you have we'll call it the onboarding survey or quiz or whatever, which spits out some sort of SKU or recommended SKU. And yeah, no, so that's a great example of I'm not familiar with any apps that people use to accomplish that. I'm sure they exist, but there's no like go-to that I'm aware of. Yeah. I mean, besides Typeform, sure. But most of the brands that I've seen have those personalization surveys, they have like it's well designed. They don't just want to do a type form. They want to have
Yeah.
a visual where you select like the size and
Animating and
yeah.
lots of graphics. Totally.
So, okay. Well, so let's go back. Let's kind of bring things back to, we'll call it useful tactical advice.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we started off this conversation saying like when you start off on Shopify, one of the benefits is that you can find specific tools or specific apps to accomplish certain parts of what you want done. So,
Yep.
but when you get more sophisticated and when you get to like a bigger business, what ends up happening is you have 12 apps to run your business,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't all necessarily talk
To each other. Yeah.
to each other well. So they might
Right.
talk, but they talk at each other, not to each other.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people are weighing that with, so what are your options? So I will tell you from my perspective as a so-called Shopify expert is one option is to build a custom app that integrates, basically simplifies 6 of those apps into one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and I hear this a lot around like the arguments around headless, where people are like, oh, well, if you do headless, like you control everything. I'm like, well, you could also just build it. You could still build your store on Shopify and then invest in hiring Shopify experts who, once you have some level of scale, build you the solutions that you need through a single app that's tightly integrated, as opposed to relying on 12 different apps that have varying levels of talking. And what's great about that is you still at the e-commerce level, you're still benefiting from all of the Shopify innovation.
Right.
Like that would be my personal inclination is I would go deep into Shopify and then hire like a small team of full stack developers who have a lot of experience with Shopify, and then just like as you get more sophisticated, have more complicated use cases, just accomplish it all through a custom app.
So which kind of apps are the ones you would say are worth consolidating into a custom app versus which ones would you keep separate?
That's a very good question. I've only thought about this in like the abstract, so I actually don't have specific examples.
Well, like for instance, we all know that SMS is kind of limited, right? Depending on what you're trying to do, how sophisticated your own tech is. And I think the brand needs to decide at that point, how much do we want to become a technology business or company versus not? And I think, I think you're absolutely right. Like there's certain types of apps you could easily consolidate into your own custom thing, but like SMS, I don't think is something you'd want to take on, at least at scale. I don't know. That's the one that's top of mind for me. Maybe everything else is worth taking in-house, but then you just need to think more like engineers. But communication, right? Like email, segmenting, data. I mean, there's a lot of tactical things I'm probably not thinking of that marketers just use all the time.
I think the obvious thing is, as you get more sophisticated with your email marketing, you want to send specific events and specific properties about customers to your CRM, whether that's Klaviyo or something else. I think the thing that drives me crazy about the SMS products that are on the market today for marketing, whether that's Attentive, PostScript, whatever, is you can't incorporate merge tags.
Right.
Like Klaviyo, I know there's a lot of people who... Klaviyo has limitations, especially where at SMS you can only use it for the US, blah, 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 but most stores are typically communicating with like US or North American customers, at least within Shopify. And so, like, merge tags are super important. It's one of those things where like I don't know what else to say. And I've contacted these brands myself to try to like integrate even our products with them, and it's basically like no.
I mean, that's
and
like
so
with
then,
Klaviyo,
at that point,
right?
it's like, what's that?
Yeah, I was going to say like Klaviyo comes from the email world, and they're trying to say, actually, most SMS is trying to say we're just the email for phones, right? Well, you're not really, because
No.
email has a lot to do with personalization. And if you can't do that, then there's only certain things you can do, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe it really comes down to having to more work into creating granular campaigns that are targeting very specific people. But there must be like a merge tag for a name, but maybe not much more than that, right?
It's like a merge tag for a name, and then for most recent product page that you visited. But
Right.
like
So very arbitrary things.
well, and it's things that are like very rigid. And granted, there's reasons for all this, right? Like I get
sure.
that. Like
They know
but-
what marketers want. It's just like, I'm sure there's technological challenges or other challenges.
yeah,
There's got to be. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. But I think what's interesting is thinking about like, but what ends up happening, and I think this is part of the problem of the 12 apps to run your business, is that you're using PostScript or Attentive for your SMS marketing. Mm-hmm. You're using what was Electric SMS for subscription management. Recharge required them. So now, at least within Recharge, you do have this, like you have that as a part of your Recharge stack, where you're using Electric SMS for subscription management. I think
You want one phone number is what you're getting at, right?
yeah.
But you end up having three.
I honestly don't know to what extent that actually matters. I've heard several, at least it's come up in one conversation with a brand I had. With one conversation that I had with a brand
Yeah.
the other day, and she was like, "Oh, I hate the fact that I have a long code for one and a short code for the other." Mm-hmm. And what I told her was like, I had the same sort of feeling when you and I first built like an SMS solution. But then as a consumer, I realized like I don't pay attention to what phone number a brand is contacting me.
Exactly.
As long as multiple brands aren't sharing the same phone number, like I care more about the communication, the ability to reply. And so I honestly don't think, beyond the fact that it's annoying, that receiving messages from multiple brands, like the argument is, oh, I want the person to be able to add the brand to my address book. Who's doing that?
I mean, I've done it myself.
Who adds
but I've actually,
a brand to your address book?
like the reason I've done it, actually, this is obviously a tangent, but
Okay.
like all these two-factor authentication text messages I get constantly,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I want to know who's sending this to me, and I didn't really request one right now. But yeah, it doesn't bother me as a consumer either, getting messages from different phone numbers. I mean, it's annoying, but it doesn't make me feel like something's wrong necessarily. At least,
But even with Second Auth, I get text messages from Chase Bank on the same short code that I get text messages from a different bank. Like, it's not...
I've actually
like-
had that too. Microsoft and like,
No, they all
Something
share.
else.
Like, it's not...
yeah.
They all share them. So, so I hear what you're saying, but the irony is, for the things that are really sensitive, they're still sharing the same phone number.
I know.
But, God forbid our food and beverage brands use the same phone number.
that actually
Meanwhile,
could be
our
confusing. I don't know
banks
if
and
I've
our
seen that.
investment accounts are. What's that?
No, I was saying that would be confusing if two brands came from the same phone number.
They do.
'Cause then
The Voyager
I haven't had
used to
that
do
yet.
that. Yeah, Voyager
yeah,
used
you
to
told
do
me that.
And so, like, then you didn't know which brand you were... Like, I would say those were, like, the olden days. That was, like, a year and a half ago.
Yeah, it had to be.
I don't know how many brands do that anymore. But Second Auth, they still do. Like, so just today I got a Second Auth text from, I think, Ally Bank, and then a Second Auth text from Chase Bank on the same number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Well, it sounds like
Anyway.
it's not a major problem, but I mean, it can be perceived from a brand perspective. But I think it's from a end user experience, it's a low priority issue. There's probably bigger fish to fry.
well, we could be the exceptions to the rule because we're old.
Maybe
Ish.
I don't know. I don't know.
Zero.
Maybe that'd be a good survey. I'm not gonna make that
All right,
survey.
well,
but-
we're 30 minutes into this, so let's. I think this is about the time that we want to like wrap this up and talk about like what are our takeaways and recommendations.
Well, I think the takeaway is definitely that, there's opportunities, whether it's for app developers or brands, to consolidate functionality that currently exists in multiple apps into one, right? I think very technically, so I think about like creating a service that can kind of funnel a lot of communication. Let's just take the example of 3 different text messages, get them funneled into one text message, phone number or something. I don't know. But there's got to be, technical solutions as well as more practical solutions that can be put out there. So I think for you and I, our homework is for next time to figure out what are the apps that could be consolidated, that make sense to be consolidated. What are some of the things that you want to impart people with at the end here?
Well, what I would say is let us know what are the apps that don't talk to each other that drive you crazy, right?
Yeah.
So think, because there's a few different reasons to want to consolidate an app. One of which is if you're paying a bunch of money to a bunch of different apps, all of which you need, and
right.
you feel like you're spending a bunch of money to accomplish one job, when that job would actually be better served through a single integrated app. So understanding from like the operator side, what are the different apps that you wish spoke to each other? Again, the biggest complaint I've heard is around information flowing into Klaviyo.
Mm-hmm. Which, interestingly enough, is what I led with, right?
Yeah.
That's where I've done a lot of customization until now in Klaviyo. I also would like to know what are the types of technical work, highly like marketing focused brands are willing to take on versus not, or if they need more advice on what to take on or not. I think that's something that's important too, right? Not everyone should be a technology company in the end.
Yeah, could you clarify a bit what you mean there? I know what you mean by that. Not everyone should be a technology
The extreme
company.
example I gave earlier, right? Like, should a brand build their own SMS tool?
Right.
Or is that like way too technical versus some sort of custom CRM, right? That kind of thing.
Got it. Yeah, and actually even like the reverse of that is for brands who have taken tech in-house, what were some really good investments where they're like, you know what, it actually ends up being a really good idea for us to own this part of our stack internally, as opposed to outsourcing it. Because I think, there's a lot of surface area in running an e-commerce brand. E-commerce is maybe even like there's a lot of surface area in running a modern brand. There's e-commerce, there's wholesale, there's there's physical retail, there's all these different channels. And I think that there are certain tools like Shopify that do a great job of big parts of running your business that you just don't want to be responsible for. So yeah, all right, cool.
Tell us what you've learned.
Tell us.
And is Shopify going in the right direction? Are they keeping the right things core and letting you integrate with the rest of it yourself? Let us know.
Or are you moving to Adobe Commerce
Adobe. Oh man.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
I think that.
Let us know that too, I guess.
All right. Until next time, this is DJ Fish and
Joel Van Horn signing off.
Okay,
Take care,
fine.
everyone.
All right.